Apple spent 13 years building the most premium laptop brand on the planet on top of somebody else's chip, and then in 2020, they released a machine that was basically a confession that the whole relationship was already over. Here's the thing nobody talks about when they bring up the MacBook Air switch to Apple Silicon. They talk about the M1 like it appeared out of nowhere, this miracle chip that changed the industry overnight. But right before that miracle happened, Apple quietly shipped one of the worst laptops they ever put their logo on, and they charged $1,000 for it. That machine is a 2020 MacBook Air, 13-inch, Intel Core i3, 2 cores, 4 threads, 8 gigs of RAM soldered in, and 256 gigs of storage. And a reviewer named RNV just got his hands on one, 6 years later, and put it through a gauntlet that exposes exactly why Apple pulled the trigger on Intel when they did. Let's talk about what $1,000 actually bought you in 2020, because the disconnect here is almost violent. For that money, you got beautiful aluminum unibody construction, a gorgeous 13.3-inch Retina display, stereo speakers that reviewers keep saying still slap even in 2026, and a build quality so tight that this specific unit survived visible dents to the chassis without a single internal component failing. This is not a cheap laptop. This is a laptop that looks and feels like luxury, and that's exactly what makes the inside of it so infuriating. Because crack it open, and what's powering all that premium aluminum is a chip that Intel themselves probably wouldn't defend today. A dual-core mobile processor clocking up to 3.2 gigahertz, paired with a cooling system so poorly engineered that the fan doesn't even blow directly onto the CPU. Read that again. Apple built a fan into this machine and then routed the airflow so it doesn't actually cool the part that generates the heat. That's not an oversight. That's a company that stopped caring about thermal engineering on their Intel line because they already knew what was coming next. And what was coming next is the part of this story that turns from a bad laptop review into a genuine business autopsy. The exact same year, 2020, Apple released the MacBook Air with the M1 chip. Same body, same price, same 13-inch screen. The only thing that changed was the silicon inside. And the M1 didn't just outperform the i3, it embarrassed it in every single category that matters, while also stretching battery life further and running cooler doing it. Think about what that means from a strategic standpoint. Apple didn't wait for the Intel version to sell out or phase out gracefully. They released a superior product at the identical price point in the same calendar year, which is about as close as a corporation gets to publicly telling you the previous product was a mistake. Now here's where it gets darker, because Intel only made up about 4% of Apple's chip revenue at the time. 4%. That's not the kind of number that should have tanked a partnership this significant. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about the comparison. Once people could put an M1 MacBook next to an Intel MacBook and see the M1 running silent while the Intel version hit triple-digit temperatures just idling, that comparison became a permanent scar on Intel's reputation in the consumer space. This wasn't a business decision. This was Apple engineering a public humiliation and calling it a product launch. So what actually happens when you push this specific machine, this $1,000 disappointment, into 2026 and try to make it do real work? RNV ran it straight, no shortcuts. And the results read like a slow-motion collapse. Basic web browsing, fine. Word processing, fine. The moment you ask this machine to multitask or render anything remotely demanding, the CPU pins to 100 degrees Celsius and just spikes. Sits there, continuously, on a laptop that costs the same as a decent gaming PC. And then he tried gaming on it, which honestly feels like an act of scientific cruelty at this point. But the data is genuinely revealing. League of Legends, arguably the lightest competitive title that exists, dropped to 20 to 40 frames per second with input delay so bad it became unplayable in 5 versus 5 combat. Valorant was worse. Keyboard and mouse inputs lagged 2 to 3 full seconds behind the action, which in a tactical shooter isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence every single round. PUBG needed 5 minutes just to load a menu screen. Wuthering Waves managed to load into a game world and then drop to single-digit frame rates the instant combat started. And Cyberpunk 2077, arguably the most demanding modern title anyone would attempt, rendered nothing but a black screen with functioning audio and UI, essentially forcing you to play blind. Here's my honest take on that last one, because it's almost poetic. A $1,000 laptop from a trillion-dollar company running a flagship AAA game is literally nothing but sound and menus. That's not a limitation, that's a symbol. Now, I want to push back on the easy narrative here, because it's tempting to just say Intel chip equals bad, Apple silicon equals good, case closed. That's lazy analysis, and it ignores something the comments section on this video actually caught, which is that not every Intel-era MacBook deserves this reputation. Multiple viewers pointed to the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro, the i7 or i9 variant paired with a Radeon Pro 5600M graphics card, as genuinely excellent hardware that holds up shockingly well even now. One commenter described using that exact configuration to render video and game competitively, claiming performance in the range of an RTX 3050 laptop GPU, sometimes exceeding it due to superior VRAM bandwidth. That's not nothing. That's a legitimately capable machine from the same company, using the same era of Intel chips, released around the same window as this Air. So the real story isn't that Intel inside a MacBook automatically means garbage performance. The real story is that Apple used the entry-level Air as a dumping ground for whatever chip configuration was cheapest to justify that price tag, while reserving actual engineering effort for the Pro lineup that professionals and creators depended on. That's a controversial claim, but look at the evidence. The Pro line got proper cooling, discrete graphics, and chips that could sustain performance under load. The Air line got a fan that doesn't blow on the processor and a CPU that throttles itself into a slideshow the moment you ask anything of it. If that's not intentional product segmentation designed to push people toward the more expensive tier, I genuinely don't know what else you'd call it. And that theory gets even more interesting when you factor in what happened after Apple Silicon launched. Once the M1 proved that Apple's own chips could outperform Intel while running cooler and lasting longer on battery, the entire justification for keeping a budget Intel tier around evaporated. There was no more reason to sell an underpowered i3 machine at a premium price when a self-designed chip could deliver pro-level efficiency in an airbody for the same money. Apple didn't just switch chip suppliers. They eliminated their own excuse for selling underpowered hardware at a premium. Let's talk numbers for a second, because the benchmark data here is almost comically low. Cinebench R15 returned a multi-core score of 231 points with a single core score of 109. For context, that's not a score that competes with contemporary laptops in 2020. That's a score that struggles against integrated systems from years earlier. And the power draw during gaming tests hovered around 9 watts, which sounds efficient until you remember efficiency doesn't matter if the actual output is framed so low the game becomes unplayable. You can sip power all day long, but if the chip can't produce a usable experience, low wattage isn't a feature, it's a symptom. Now, here's a detail that genuinely surprised me digging into the reaction to this video, because it reframes the entire cooling failure as something almost deliberate. Multiple commenters, including some with direct engineering knowledge, pointed out that Intel locked undervolting capability on their 10th and 11th generation mobile chips following a security vulnerability called Plundervolt. That means owners of this exact laptop and machines like it lost the ability to manually reduce voltage and tame the runaway heat output, a workaround that used to let enthusiasts squeeze meaningfully better thermal performance out of underpowered cooling systems. So not only did Apple ship a fan that doesn't blow on the CPU, Intel simultaneously closed off the one software trick that could have partially compensated for it. Two separate companies, two separate decisions, and the end result is a laptop that runs hot with zero legal way to cool it down through firmware. That's the kind of detail that turns a simple bad laptop review into something closer to a conspiracy of neglect. Nobody set out to make this machine fail this specifically, but layer enough corner-cutting decisions on top of each other. A cooling design that ignores the actual heat source, a security patch that removes thermal workarounds, and a base configuration that undercuts its own price point. And you get a device that feels less like an accident and more like the natural result of two companies quietly deprioritizing a product line they both knew was about to become obsolete. I also want to sit with the bootcamp angle for a second, because it's one of the only genuine silver linings buried in this whole story. Since this machine runs on x86 Intel architecture, it retained the ability to dual boot into full Windows, something Apple Silicon Macs completely lost the moment they switched architectures. That's a real trade-off worth acknowledging. Yes, the M1 destroyed this i3 in every performance metric that matters. But it also permanently closed the door on native Windows compatibility for anyone who wanted the build quality of a MacBook with the software flexibility of a PC. Some of the people commenting on this video pointed out they still keep Intel-era Macs specifically for that reason, running Windows natively for gaming while using macOS for everything else. So there's a legitimate argument that something valuable got sacrificed in the name of raw performance, and that's a trade-off Apple has never really addressed publicly. Which brings me to the bigger picture question this whole review is really asking, whether anyone frames it that way or not. When a company builds its entire premium image around craftsmanship, aluminum unibodies, Retina displays, industry-leading speakers, but then ships hardware inside that can't sustain basic gaming performance without hitting the boiling point of water, what does that tell you about where their priorities actually sat during that era? I don't think it's a stretch to say Apple was coasting on brand perception for the entire Intel chapter of their laptop lineup, using premium materials to distract from the fact that the actual computing engine underneath was frequently mediocre at best. And if you want the most damning piece of evidence in this entire story, it's not the frame rates, it's not the thermals, it's the release calendar. Apple didn't need a competitor to expose this laptop's weaknesses. They exposed it themselves in the same year with the exact same price tag by simply installing a chip they designed in-house. That's not bad luck. That's a company demonstrating in real time exactly how much headroom had been left on the table the entire time they were relying on somebody else's silicon. So when you strip away the nostalgia and the aluminum and the perfectly clean speaker output, what you're left with is a machine that functions less like a laptop and more like historical evidence. Evidence of a partnership that had already curdled behind the scenes long before Apple made the switch public. Evidence that premium branding and premium performance are two completely different promises, and companies will absolutely let you pay full price for only one of them. And evidence that sometimes the most revealing tech review isn't about the newest flagship at all. It's about going back and finally asking the machine everyone forgot to interrogate at launch, what were you actually hiding under all that aluminum the whole time?
If you enjoy this video, please like, share, subscribe and hit the bell to the later update from my channel. Thank you for watching till the end and see you in the next video.